I want to welcome all those folks who will be watching this recording of a message that comes from Grace United Church in Coombs, British Columbia. This is April 21st, 2024. It is a beautiful day here. Earth Day is tomorrow, and we have friends who are here in person and friends online. And for you joining us later on, we hope this message will inspire you to be generous in your love, kindness, and compassion. I found that when people live in turbulent or uncertain times, it's good to find the anchors of faith that provide us with hope and stability. And we followers of Jesus have tremendous spiritual and emotional resources available to us for such times as these. So when we apply those resources and the core message of Jesus to today's global, local, and personal challenges, we have the potential to experience a richer, a more peace-filled life. But beyond that, we have the possibility to grow more like Jesus and to be beacons of light and hope to the people around us, or to give encouragement to those who are really struggling or those who are finding life so difficult. And so we need to draw on those spiritual resources so that we have what we need not only for our own selves, but so that we can be a real blessing and hope giver and love sharer with the people around us. And so today I'm going to start a new series which I hope will help you both individually and a congregation together to grow more like Jesus. And the springboard for the messages will be Paul's words to the people in a region of what used to be called Galatia, which is modern day, kind of the middle of modern day Turkey. And specifically, I'm going to follow and focus on Paul's famous paragraph on cultivating the fruit of the Spirit. You've probably heard a few sermons on that famous passage over the years. And it's a passage from Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 to 26. And so I'm just going to read this very, very brief passage. Of course, Galatians is a kind of a short epistle, it's called, one of the letters that Paul wrote to some of the churches, but Galatia encompassed a variety of churches. And this comes from chapter 5, and it's talking about life in the Spirit, what it is to be a follower of Jesus as we allow the Spirit of Jesus to kind of influence us, to affect our minds and our hearts, and to enable that Spirit to so motivate us to be a different kind of person in the world around us. And so Paul has these words, which is to live by the Spirit and not gratify the desires of a sinful nature. That's how he kind of starts it off, verse 16. But verse 22, he says, the fruit of the Spirit is what you need to cultivate. And that fruit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against these things there is no law. 9 fruits of the Spirit that Paul shares with us that he wants to encourage us to grow in. Now, I think over the years, most of us have tried to live good, decent lives, tried to live as if Jesus would be, proud of us, or that would reflect more of Jesus in our lives. Now, Jesus doesn't expect us to be perfect because that's impossible. But I do think that Jesus expects his followers to be engaged in this process of this ongoing changes to produce better fruit in our lives, to be better people, to be gentler people, to be more kind and considerate and compassionate, to allow the Spirit to grow the fruit that Paul talks about in those 9 fruits of the Spirit. When you get to the other books in the letters in the New Testament, you often read that either Paul or James or Peter, one of the apostles, were writing to those early churches trying to offer them wisdom and advice, sometimes in kind of stark words, because they were dealing with lots of problems in those churches. And I'll get into some of those details as to why those letters sometimes seem like Paul or Peter or James is kind of scolding the congregations for not doing what they thought they should be doing. So they want to help these new communities of faith grow in their understanding of who Jesus is and to live out the Spirit's call in their life. Now, it wasn't easy in those early communities of faith because they had attracted this whole new mix of people from all different cultures and backgrounds, social classes, and religious traditions. And so this was something a little bit new for that part of the world. And to appreciate what those early followers were facing, you have to understand that many of those early believers, the first believers, started out to be Jewish communities. So, because Paul and Peter and all the apostles were Jews, then when the gospel started to spread beyond the Jewish territory, naturally they were coming in contact with Gentile people. But they started those communities with the Jewish people, first of all, and then it started to kind of grow from there. But you have to understand that most of those Jewish believers would eat kosher food, they would recite Jewish prayers, they would follow all of the Jewish traditions and the festivals particular to the Jewish faith. But as the gospel spreads into this Gentile territory like Galatia, all sorts of people who aren't Jewish become followers of Jesus. So people who aren't concerned about kosher food, who don't dress, talk, or act like Jewish people, now they're part of these communities of faith that are followers of Jesus. Now, of course, those first Jewish leaders, the Christian leaders, understand that Jesus is for everybody. Jesus isn't just this guru for the Jewish people. They understood that Jesus was there for everyone, no matter their race or religion, no matter whether they were slave or free, no matter whether they were Jew or Gentile or women or men. Jesus was there for everybody. But how do you encourage people not to follow the Jewish laws, but to actually create a new community that focuses more on Jesus and less on those Jewish laws? What practices did they need to follow? What were the important things that Jesus gave them? And what are the things that they should just let go of? And that's where you get the letters of Paul and Peter and others who are trying to help navigate this radically different community of faith. Remember, all of those leaders had grown up, taught, and been trained in the Jewish faith. And now they have to adapt the Jewish faith and the teachings of Jesus to this radically different world of which these new communities are springing up, where Gentile people are coming in with their traditions, with their beliefs. And how do you create a new community? So there's always going to be some tensions. There's always going to be some problems. And so what the early leaders, including Paul, those letters are there to help them navigate this radically different community of faith that bridges the Jewish culture that Jesus was immersed in with the new faith, though, that Jesus teaches them, that is inclusive, which is broader, which is built on God's grace and love and not on following the law. That was not easy. Now, in our context, here we are, Christians living in a modern, highly individualized, multicultural context. How do we decide what are the essential practices and beliefs of our faith? Now, naturally, we do this in community. This is typically how we've done it. You do it in community. You decide what are the important things that we share. We look to the scriptures as a foundation upon which we are able to draw on. We listen to the heritage of our faith and people who've gone before us. And all of it is filtered through our own personal experiences of what it is to grow up in a church or what it is to be followers of Jesus. But primarily, I hope we would shift everything or see everything, sift everything, not shift, sift everything through the lens and life of the ministry and teachings of Jesus. We don't want to be legalists, and we don't want to be kind of loosey-goosey either, saying it doesn't matter what you believe, anything goes. In many ways, that was the challenge that Paul was facing. And that's what led him to write those letters that we have in the New Testament. You see, Paul, when he wrote to the people in Galatia, that region in Turkey, he was far away from them. But through letters, they would communicate back and forth, and he got the impression and he knew that there were problems that were springing up in all of these little churches. And so he wanted, as the founder of them, to write to them to say, oh, I hear that there's some things going off the rails. Here's my advice, here's my wisdom, here's my experience of Jesus. And so that's what those letters are. And so he's writing this letter to the Galatians. And the theme of the letter is freedom. Freedom from the power of sin, and freedom from the law as a measuring stick of our lives, and freedom to let Christ live through us by the power of the Spirit. So freedom is really at the heart of this letter to the Galatians. And as the letter comes to this close in chapters 5 and 6, Paul reminds the people that when they allow God's Spirit to live through them and in them, the Spirit produces a more Christ-like believer and more Christ-like qualities or virtues. And he lists these 9 that we heard in the scripture passage, the fruit of the Spirit. Paul sets up that verse, 22 and 23, those 2 verses, by saying, live by the Spirit. And the actual Greek word translated as live means to walk in the Spirit. And it's moving in a certain direction, not going around in circles. In Calgary and in other places, they have, the traffic circles. We have a few here. But when you get to cities in Europe or in Calgary, they have double circles. I get so confused in those double roundabouts because I never know when I'm supposed to be on the inside of the circle or on the outside of the circle. And I've had in Calgary for sure. It's the only one I've ever had that has those double, roundabouts. I had so many people honking at me because I was always in the wrong lane. And frequently, I would have to go around the circle several times before I got my exit. Have you ever had to do that? And in Europe, it's even worse. I don't know how they navigate 3 or 4 lanes of everyone going every which way. Well, I think Paul is saying, you have to walk in the Spirit and not just keep going around in circles, doing the same old, because that really doesn't get you anywhere in life. And so this is why he uses that word, walk in the Spirit. It's to move in a certain direction, to get out of that loop that oftentimes cultures are in, and find a way that is closer to what Jesus would want for our lives. And Paul understands that the culture around those folks in Galatia can exert a great deal of influence. Of course they did. They were big modern cities in their day. They were multicultural. They had all sorts of, different religions and temples and gods that people worshipped. And there was a lot of crazy stuff that went on. A lot like our own day, right? We live in this multicultural, connected world where you can get nearly anything off the internet. Good and bad. And there's so many scams and you have to be so careful. Isn't that true? So Paul is trying to address the confusion of his day, and it can be confusing to navigate life in our day. And it's easy to get pulled along with culture because culture has a great influence for better or for worse. And I'm not saying that Paul wants us to reject all culture. That would be crazy. There are so many beautiful things that God does through the cultures of different people. And I'm so glad that we live in this nation that's multicultural because we get to, in some ways, rub shoulders with people who come from a different place and land, who speak a different language, and who bring the richness of their cultures into the mix of our lives. Those are beautiful things. But there are some things in Paul's day, the cultural things, that oftentimes created problems for a lot of people. And they weren't helpful for the communities of faith either. So Paul is calling those early believers to walk in such a way that their lives more and more reflect the character traits or the fruit of the Spirit that Jesus himself modeled. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are the qualities or character traits that Paul says you see exactly in Jesus' life. And we want to emulate those things. We want to walk in the way of Jesus and the qualities that he expressed in his life. So in the last minutes of my message, I want to talk about that first fruit of the Spirit, love. And to get into this topic, I want you to tell me the things that you love. What are the things that you love? Folks online, just bear with us, okay? What are some of the things that you love? What's that? You love gardening.
I love knitting.
You love knitting.
I love the gardens and all the natural growth.
All the beauty and natural growth around us. What else do you love? Your wife. Good answer, Rick. Yes, okay. Yeah, Barb, what were you going to say? Yeah, your husband, of course. Well, we could go on. You know, most of us like a good steak, a nice glass of wine, or dogs. Of course you love your dogs, your pets, right? Of course you do. We love so many things. You know, the Calgary Flames, for those who, you know, come from Calgary. No? Karen, what are you're shaking your head. Are you an Edmonton Oilers fan? You just don't follow that stuff. Okay. Well, those out here probably follow the Vancouver Canucks, right? Connie's dad loved the Canucks.
Go Leafs, go.
Go Leafs, go. Toronto, there you go. You know, my wife loves Leonard Cohen, and she loves me, but it's a toss-up who gets more attention. She can't say anything, can she? She's on mute. I hope you love Jesus more than your Timmy's double-double. My point is this: the word love is used today to express our affection for so many different things, right? It's wide open. And because of that, the original meaning of love actually has been diluted, because you can love your spouse or your partner, or you can love, you know, the donuts over here at Goats on the Roof. But I expect you probably love your partner more than those. Oh, Barb's not going to commit on that one. The ancient Greeks had a similar problem because there was so much to love around them. So the word love just couldn't be enough to encapsulate what love really means in different ways. So they used several different words to describe the love. So in Paul's days, there were these three variations. Eros was this passionate love. That's where you get erotic love from. The second was phileo, a love within healthy families, or the friends that we have that we really love our friends. That's this phileo love. But neither of those Greek words about love was adequate for Paul when he started to think about what God in Jesus had shown him in life. And that's where we get this agape love. So this is a word that wasn't often used in the Greek language, but Paul picks it up to express the experience of what real transformative love from God's Spirit into our lives is all about. That's what he's talking about. This is this older, rare Greek word, agape. A.J. Sherrill from the States describes this type of love this way: agape love is selfless. It is other-oriented love that often costs us something so that another person can flourish. It will cost us something so another person can flourish. This sacrificial, costly type of love doesn't come naturally or easily to most people. It must come from a different source, something found in the very nature of God revealed in Jesus Christ. And Paul knows about that agape love personally, firsthand, because it's a love that penetrated his old, calloused heart and literally changed the course of his life. You know, he went from being this angry, bitter law enforcement officer with the religious elite, the Jewish elite of his day. He was there as an enforcer initially of Jewish law against the early Christian believers. But then he had this profound experience of the love of Jesus that showed him in actual fact that even though he was a man who had done terrible things, he was angry, he was a man who obviously had probably participated in the execution of some of those early Christians. But when he had that profound experience of Jesus Christ touching his heart and saying, Paul, you're going the wrong direction. You're in the roundabout, and you're never going to get away from self-loathing and guilt and being angry if you keep doing the same things. You need to get off and walk with me and experience my love and grace. And then you will see what agape love really is about. It is about what God does in our hearts to transform us. He went from that angry, bitter old man to a devoted follower of Jesus, willing to suffer and sacrifice his own life so that others, all these different people and groups, Gentiles, Jews, slaves and free, old and young, women and men, they might also experience this life-changing force that produces good fruit and a different character and a blessed life. Paul's greatest song or hymn to love is one that we often hear at weddings. Remember from 1 Corinthians? Maybe you had it at your wedding. We had it at ours, I know. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not envious or boastful. It's not proud or rude. It's not self-serving or self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. This agape love never fails. Now, don't you think that kind of love is so desperately needed in our world today? If we had more and more people who experienced God's love to transform their hearts and lives, and then also, shared that kind of love in their families and communities, this world would be such a much more beautiful place. This is a love that is enduring, a love that is other-focused, a love that heals, forgives, restores, and renews. But the source of that type of love isn't one that is easily developed or learned by human effort alone, because the source of that transformational love is the indwelling Spirit of God that makes possible the flow of the love of Christ into the heart of the believer. And without that Spirit, this agape love is really nearly impossible to replicate and experience. It is the love that comes to us, this transformational love, that comes from God to us. I recently came across a quote that I think expresses how this kind of love finds its way into our hearts. Here's the quote: "We don't create this kind of love as much as we get caught up in this type of love." You don't create the agape love. In actual fact, you get caught up in it. I want to ask you to remember when you first fell in love. Not puppy love. You know what? There was a girl in my grade 5 class. I was in love with her. I was in love with Anita too. She was my prom date. She was way above my class, but I loved her. There were a lot of other guys, I think, who loved her too. But you know what? I'm talking about that first love, or the first loves of your life that you can probably nearly remember. Not just a kind of that butterfly feeling that, that songwriters talk about, but something a little bit deeper. That love that starts to stir your heart, and you start to feel things that you hadn't felt before. Now, that kind of love doesn't always stay with us for a long, long, long time. It's hard to sustain that kind of love, right? But it doesn't only happen when you're a teenager in your 20s. Love like that can happen at any age. Look at that. Dave and Marion are holding hands. They're still in that kind of love, which is wonderful. You get caught up in that kind of love. This is what he's talking about. You get caught up in that love. It's not that kind of love that you learn or that you think, oh, she would be a good mate for me. No, it's you get caught up in love. And when you get caught up in that kind of love, it changes nearly everything about you. That, I think, expresses what it is to have the Spirit moving in us that produces these changes within us. We get caught up in a love for God. We get caught up in the love that God has for us. And then we start to see other people around us, I hope, in a different way. We start to see with eyes of love. We start to have hearts of compassion, of love for people who oftentimes are hard to love. This isn't some idea of a loving God, but a real experience of God we get caught up in that. And we come to discover that that love that God has for us is freely given. And it regularly has the power to fill our hearts up. If our hearts have been broken, God's love can fill up that brokenness and heal those hearts and those wounds. When our lives are starved for meaning, or when we have just such weight on our shoulders, that kind of love, when you get caught up back in it, recognizing that God's love is going to be there to sustain you through all the troubled times, it gives you a different perspective. And this self-sacrificing, life-transforming agape love is the one we see displayed in the life and death of Jesus. Jesus washing the disciples' feet. He was the master. He was the guru. The disciples were the ones who were supposed to wash master's feet, but Jesus, in humility and agape love, washes their feet. Or Jesus, healing a person debilitated by leprosy or some other disease, not afraid to touch them when they were untouchables. You think of India now, untouchables, they had untouchables in the Jewish places as well. Jesus isn't afraid to touch people who have these serious illnesses. Or Jesus welcoming someone who'd been ostracized by their lifestyle or by the poor choices that they made in life, like that woman caught in adultery who's about to be stoned, and Jesus is there. And all he has to do is write in the sand and not say much, other than, if you are a person who hasn't ever committed a sin, then you feel free to throw the first stone. And of course, everyone walks away. All those angry old men walk away. Jesus offers her compassion, agape love, and forgiveness, and she rises as a free woman. The most powerful expression of agape love when Jesus dies on the cross, once for all, so people might see the full extent of God's love for broken people, and then get caught up in that transformational love. That's what Paul is talking about. Get caught up in this transformational love that God has for you, and that God wants to now use you to have other people experience that. That's what it's about. This is the agape love. Now, of course, the fruits of the Spirit, these qualities, are also interpersonal qualities and community virtues. In fact, it was this relational problems that prompted Paul to write this section in Galatians in the first place. Here's what he says in Galatians 5:13, ahead of this passage. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But don't use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in agape love. And the entire law is summed up in this single command: love your neighbor as yourself. And if you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out or you'll be destroyed. So true. We see that happen in so many communities, not just church communities, but so many other communities. Backbiting and fighting amongst people, when in actual fact, Paul says, if you live your life with love, joy, peace, and those fruits of the Spirit, then the communities will reflect that as well, and you're going to be quite a different place, and it'll be attractive. In this part of Paul's letter, we see that the church in Galatia was facing some serious relational issues. So when he teaches about the fruit of the Spirit, he's not just talking about individual people. He's talking about the believers coming together and exercising these fruits together collectively, because there is power when a whole group of people are loving and kind and generous and self-controlled and peace-filled. I'm so glad to be a part of this community of faith where people really do strive to put others first and allow the spirit of agape love to flow through them, flow through us to the community around. I see that in what you do outside of the community, how so many of you do incredible things in the wider community to make this a better place for everyone to live. Not just people who look and sound like us, but for people who are on the margins. You are doing some beautiful things because of the agape love of Christ in your life. I see what you do in your homes when you're caring for someone who has a debilitating disease or illness, and you are there for them. That is agape love. When you are caring for younger people or helping those who can't care for themselves, that's agape love. And when communities live by this and allow the Spirit to keep filling the tank of agape love in here so we have enough to give others, That's living like Jesus. And that's the community Jesus is building. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you that here we are today in church, and we've got so many blessings in our lives, and I'm thankful for the people around me, thankful for this community of faith and for others who are sharing the love of Jesus lavishly with the communities around them. I pray for you to help each one of us to feel filled today with your love for us individually, as well as the love that we share together in Christ, because he's the one who showed it to us first. So continue to work in our lives, continue to fill us up, continue to help us to walk according to the Spirit, and to love others as you have loved us. Amen.